Welcome to Food Industry Business License Compliance Explained live webinar that is taking place on Tuesday, March 12, 2024. My name is Aisha Stewart and I will be your moderator. Please note, following today's webinar, there will be a few evaluation questions that I will be sharing with you. Our presenters today are Hans Hauk, Manager Content Management, and Kobe Ringenberg, Senior Content Management Associate for CT. Without further ado, I would like to hand it over to Hans. Welcome, Hans.
Hey, thanks, Aisha, as always, and welcome everyone to our presentation on business license compliance for the food industry. We're going to cover most of the major business types in the industry, from food manufacturers and processors, all the way down to retailers like grocery stores and restaurants. And at a basic level, we're going to touch on what sorts of licenses and permits each business type might require, what the licensing process looks like for some of those licenses, and how food businesses maintain compliance over the years. And my challenge really with any webinar is catering to all levels of experience, from the brand new business owner to the legal team of the major brand. So that being said, this won't be an absolutely exhaustive, in-depth examination, more of a 101 bird's eye, but we will cover the major topics so that by the end of the webinar, you'll have a good solid idea, at least of the structure of regulations within the industry, some of the types of regulations, and how things are laid out. If you've been in the business for a long time, maybe it'll just be a nice refresher. So with that said, let's introduce ourselves. Kobe, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Hans. My name is Kobe Ringenberg, and I am a Senior Content Management Associate on the Knowledge Specialist team, which is a CT team dedicated to building and maintaining the knowledge base of the business license divisions. I've been doing business license research for 11 years now. Hans, I'll let you take the wheel now.
Sure, thanks. I'm Hans Hauk. So I've been in business legal compliance for about 10 years, maybe 11 actually now. Currently, I manage the Knowledge Specialist team, which is the CT team dedicated to building and maintaining the knowledge base for the business license division. I assist license filers with complex legal statute analysis, things like that, outreach to licensing authorities. And I also create and present content like this webinar. So that's us. Now, I think the next slide, let's briefly go over our actual agenda for today. So we're going to start with just an overview of the industry at large, the business types that exist, and some quick notes on the types of regulations that are at the various levels of government. Then we'll start diving into each of the main business types that comprise the food industry, from manufacturing, processing and warehousing, to your grocery stores and retail food marts, to restaurants, and finally to some more niche regulated business types like your home-based cottage food business, things like that. After that, we'll take a look at what's on the horizon for food industry regulation, so where have things been trending and what we expect to continue. We'll leave some time at the end for a Q&A segment, and then we will wrap it up. So what are the aims of regulation across the food industry? Based on the laws and regulation that exist today, we can see that the major concern really is public health. And that's obvious, right? I mean, you really have two industries, food and drugs, whose entire business is the sale of a product that gets directly ingested into the human body. And so it stands to reason that these would be two of the most regulated industries out there, because they have the biggest potential for harm to the public health. And so to that end, the federal government has several sub-branches, including the Food and Drug Administration, right, the FDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Office of Disease Prevention and Health Promotion, that create regulations and standards to make sure the food on the market is safe to consume. Now, notice I didn't say healthy, but at least not acutely harmful. And going further, individual states, counties, and even towns and cities impose their own regulations through their departments of health or safety in order to protect the residents of their jurisdictions. Okay, so what are the types of regulations that exist? Well, looking at this slide, the first item there is compliance with health and safety standards. So states and localities in particular are required to have a certain amount of regulatory structure in place that adheres to the prescribed standards laid down by the federal government. And so a big aim of any state food law is to comply with those federal standards on things like proper food storage measures, implementation of food handling certifications, and any structure that ensures public safety and prevents foodborne illnesses. Getting a little more specific, regulations at both the federal and state level, for instance, deal with labeling and packaging regulations. So there are laws in place that mandate things like nutrition labels, allergen alerts, expiration dates, and things of that nature. Just as a little side factoid, I'm sure everyone has seen a best by date on a food product. Not the expiration date, but it'll say something like best if used by March 14th, 2024. Well, these best if used by dates aren't actually a legal requirement at any level of government. And in fact, they don't even really have to adhere to any standard. They're essentially made up by manufacturers to provide a suggested use date for best flavor. But honestly, you can safely consume food past those dates for any food product, with I think the lone exception being infant formula, which actually does have a hardcore use by date that's tied to optimal nutrition. But I just find that interesting. Use by dates have nothing to do with any actual standard or regulation, and they don't even need to be based on science or research. Just something to think about. Okay, moving on. Another aim of food industry regulation is environmental and sustainability measures. So these regulations have to do with sustainable farming and sourcing practices, management of waste, and other regulations designed to protect the environment. So in this category, you'll find things like your fats, oil, grease permits, which are called FOG permits, dumpster permits, various types of fire permits, things like that. And next we have your basic licenses and permits to operate. So aside from your standard food facility license or food processor registration, there very well may be basic business licenses issued by a town or a city or a county for all businesses operating within their jurisdiction, regardless of the type of business it is. Also included here may be things like sign permits, sidewalk cafe permits, boiler permits, all sorts of random essential operating permits based on the location of your facility and the type of operation you're running. Then we have food safety and handling training. And these are the standards for training and sometimes certification for individual staff and food handlers. Things like hygiene requirements, washing hands, hair nets. We can even lump in things like ABC certification for servers in a restaurant serving alcoholic beverages. These types of regulations make sure that individuals are acting in a safe and hygienic way with whatever food product they're handling. And then finally, we have traceability and recall procedures. And these are typically federal regulations designed to create a system for flagging food that has been deemed dangerous or contaminated for one reason or another and subsequently recalled. And I'm sure everyone's heard of a particular food product being recalled, often right after we've binged an entire box of said food item. I'm looking at you, Rico Enchiladas, but we won't go into that. And honestly, we're not going to spend too much time talking about recall regulation because it doesn't have much to do with licensing. But I did want to add it here because it's certainly a regulation type that businesses in the food industry need to be aware of. So from this slide, you can really get an idea of not only the aims of food business regulation, but also just the sheer breadth of regulation types across the food industry. Pretty much every facet of food businesses is regulated in some way. Now that we have a decent idea of the various types of regulations that we find, I'm going to dive right into our first business type, and then I'll hand the baton off to Kobe. So at the top of the food chain, pun intended, we have manufacturers and processors. Now we separate manufacturer from processor, and here's the breakdown of why. A food processing business is a type of enterprise that takes raw agricultural products and transforms them into finished food products suitable for consumption. The process usually involves various steps like cleaning, sorting, chopping, preserving, packaging, labeling, cooking, all that kind of stuff. But when we say food processing businesses, we're often talking about a business which may focus on just one or maybe a few stages of food preparation. Whereas food manufacturers, usually when we say that, we're typically talking about a business that handles the entire production process, from sourcing raw materials to packaging and distributing the final products. So you can look at food processing as a business activity of food manufacturers. However, there are businesses that only focus on one part of food preparation or a few parts, and these can be called food processors. Does that make sense to everybody? And lumped in at this stage of the food industry chain, I'm also including warehousers and distributors. So warehousers obviously providing storage logistics for food products, and distributors managing delivery, shipment, logistics of distribution. Now, in this segment of the industry, we find regulations at the federal level and at the state and local level, depending on how the regulatory responsibility is divvied up in that state. Now, just as a quick aside, I'm not going to go into all of the basic business requirements, like the formation of your business, registration for sales tax if you sell a product, payroll taxes if you have employees. I'm going to assume that across the board, for time's sake, the business has fulfilled those generic requirements. But getting into the specific requirements, at the federal level, your main regulator is going to be the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. And the foundational registration for this tier here is the food facility registration. So the FDA says that, quote, food facilities that manufacture, process, pack, or hold food for consumption in the U.S. must register as a food facility as mandated by the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. Now, food facility registration involves creating an account on the FDA's online registration portal and registering online by stating all of your business information, the ownership information, declaring the food products that you're manufacturing or processing or distributing, agreeing to regular inspections of your facility, and providing other certifications. This gets your facility into the FDA's system so that they can inspect and monitor the activity of the manufacturer, processor, food warehouser, whatever it may be. The other major federal regulator is the U.S. Department of Agriculture, the USDA. So if your food manufacturing business involves meat, poultry, or egg products, you'll probably need to register with that branch. And you'll also most likely need to submit your actual food product labels for approval. So they're pretty strict. Obviously, meat, poultry, those types of food products are some of the most heavily regulated, as they're obviously at an increased risk for contamination. And this is almost all done electronically via web submissions now. So, it's a relatively streamlined, modern process, but it is there. Okay, so staying in the federal realm, I'll just mention a couple of other regulations at the federal level that you might encounter. The first is called prior notice of imported foods. So if you are importing food products into the United States, you must submit prior notice to the FDA before the food arrives in the US. So that's one sort of auxiliary requirement you might have as a food manufacturer. There are also those environmental permits and registrations I mentioned a little while ago. So depending on the size and type of facility you're running, you may need to obtain waste management permits, emissions permits, wastewater permits from the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And these permits are obtained usually online by filling out an application and stating the size and layout of your facility, the various operations that will be conducted there. And then depending on the permit type, you might have to declare things like your anticipated emissions numbers, anticipated effect on local waterways or groundwater, and action plans for dealing with waste that your food facility generates. Okay, that's all I'm going to mention for federal at the moment for this tier, but let's talk about some state and local requirements. And the thing you'll notice about food facility regulation within states is that, of course, each state is different. And with food regulation, I'm talking about each state having different requirements, license types, etc. But even whether the state is the main regulator or whether it's the local county or city, even that varies from state to state. But I'm sort of getting ahead of myself because this kind of variation here for this tier of the industry is typically more applicable to retail food establishments and restaurants. The counties and things might regulate those. But for our purposes in the manufacturing processing realm, those are almost all regulated at the state level, with a couple of exceptions. But states will almost always require some kind of state license for food processors, manufacturers, warehousers, and distributors. Usually the license is issued through the State Department of Health and Safety or State Department of Agriculture. And lucky for us, there are a lot of commonalities in the licensing process across the board. Typically, in order to get a license, you'll have to provide your basic business information, ownership details, facility floor plan, information about the types of food you'll be dealing with. You might need to show proof of liability insurance, a schematic showing the locations of various pieces of machinery within your facility. I've seen that being required. Things like cold storage freezers, where is everything located? Where's the sinks? Where's the drains? Things like that. And also business plans for safety and compliance with the imposed regulations. There's usually an application fee, can range from $50 to a couple thousand, depending on the size of your facility and the predetermined risk level of the types of foods you'll be working with. And application processing can take a couple of weeks up to several months. Now, often before a state will issue a license, an inspection of the facility will occur to make sure the building is compliant with regards to fire safety, cleanliness, location of equipment. If all checks out, the license will be issued. And just remember that when you registered at the federal level as a food facility with the FDA, you also agreed to allow regular federal inspections as well. So going forward, you should always be prepared for that. Those can happen every 3 to 5 years or more often, depending on the risk level determined for the food you are dealing with. Okay, that felt like a lot. But just to summarize, food manufacturers, processors, warehousers, and distributors are regulated at the federal level by the FDA, potentially the USDA, and the EPA. You will need to register and obtain the proper permits with each of those government bodies. Then at the state level, you'll almost always need a food manufacturer or processor license in whichever state your facility is located. Be prepared to submit lots of documents, including floor plans and schematics, as well as allow regular federal and state inspections. And be prepared to keep up with license renewals too. So those do renew on either an annual basis or every other year basis or every 5 years sometimes. But I'm going to go ahead and hand the reins to Kobe to bring us on down the food product chain to our next sector. So Kobe.
Thanks, Hans. So I'm confident that everyone knows what a grocery store is and has been in one. But however, this category encompasses such retail food locations as convenience stores such as 7-Eleven, Sheetz, and Royal Farms, just to name a few. Gas stations, which are usually connected to a convenience store or a grocery store. Bodegas, which is a small grocery store, especially in a Spanish-speaking neighborhood in the U.S. Markets, of course, the grocery store or supermarket. And Merriam-Webster defines a grocery store as a store that sells food and household supplies. It's a pretty broad definition. Smaller stores may be specialized or not have that much to offer as larger grocery stores and member warehouses will. These are the bodegas, the Asian markets, or the Asian specialty stores, and the small mom and pop grocery store in town that has been opened as long as anyone can remember. Larger grocery stores or member warehouses will carry a wide variety of items: food, household supplies, specialty items, etc. You may even see a bank associated with a store or a pharmacy operating inside the store. In some cases, vision centers, hearing centers, and salons can also be seen in these types of larger stores or member warehouses. No matter which type of grocery store one plans to open and operate, there are multiple licenses from the federal government, state, county, and local jurisdictions. Let's start with the federal licenses. Any license or permit from the FDA, such as a Perishable Acts, Agriculture's Commodities Act, or PACA, is required by any person who buys or sells more than 2,000 pounds of fresh or frozen fruits and vegetables in any given day. This license is far more likely required by the larger member warehouse stores or the larger grocery stores. Just depends on how much you sell of those items in a day. There's also the alcohol users and dealers permits through the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. That's for liquor licenses that are required for selling alcoholic beverages. And those are the basic federal licenses that are required. But at the state level, there will be a variety of license types depending on the state laws and requirements. As Hans has mentioned, each state and county is different. However, in general, a grocery store will need the following: a retail food license, which requires a plan review prior to the retail food license being submitted. This is a license obtained from the state or county health department, environmental health division, in most cases. There's a couple states where it's through a different department, but in most cases, it's through the environmental health division of the health department. There are state liquor licenses for the sale of beer and wine and spirits. Please be aware of state and local laws for liquor. For instance, Indiana and Pennsylvania only allow so many licenses to be obtained and are quite strict about this rule. Indiana has dry counties and cities as well, which do not even allow the sale of alcohol. Tobacco licenses, which are necessary for selling tobacco products. Lottery licenses allow the sale of lottery tickets and games of chance. Some of the larger member warehouses or larger grocery stores may require fertilizer permits if they're selling fertilizers and plants. Pharmacy licenses, bank licenses, salon licenses for those stores that have those businesses operating within those stores. For gas stations, there may be additional fuel taxes as well, and Environmental Protection Agency permits for gas stations too. There's also weights and measures permits for any food weighing devices and the point of sales devices, which are the cash registers. At the county level, there may be retail food license requirements if they're not at the state level. And in some cases, the state, you get the application from the state, but you send it to the county. Counties in some states have additional liquor license requirements as well. And then at the local level, there may be specific liquor license requirements. It's fewer and farther between, but they are there. The city or town may also require a general business license for the store. It is important to know the local rules. More than one general business license may be required if there is more than one business activity in a location. For example, a grocery store with a bank or with a pharmacy may need a license for each business activity. There may be additional permits that are required. These may include alarm permits, sign permits, and elevator or escalator permits that are done through the state or the county. Some of the legal hurdles that one must be aware of are facility inspections. As Hans stated, inspections are required for most of these, for all of these, actually, I shouldn't say most of them. There will be food inspections, building inspections, fire inspections, and if necessary, EPA inspections. The store will be required to follow federal, state, county, and local storage and handling regulations, and employees working in meat departments, delis, or bakeries may be required to hold additional sanitation or food handler permits, which are often provided at the county level to individuals. That's 15 or 20 licenses and permits for one business. That's a lot. And fees can range from $15 upwards to over $1,000 if you're selling liquor. And some of the licenses are required prior to the other licenses. And the turnaround time can be anywhere from a few days to several months. So it is best to make sure you have a plan prior to obtaining all the licenses needed. Generally, all of these licenses and permits require annual renewals and updates to any changed information within a 10 to 30 day time frame. Of course, the renewals can be at different times of the year, which can cause confusion when trying to make sure the store is in compliance. Using an app or a service to keep everything up to date and in compliance is very helpful with a grocery store. One other thing I'd like to note is a food facility license is not required for a grocery store, but they may be required for standalone butchers or standalone bakeries. And now let's move on to the restaurants. Again, I believe we are all familiar with what a restaurant is. However, for a refresher, a restaurant is a place where people pay to sit and eat meals that are cooked and served on the premises. These can include coffee shops, cafes, diners, fast food, sit-down, common victualers, hotels, motels, bed and breakfast, daycare, and outdoor eateries, depending on the state or county regulations. Some restaurants are takeout only, but it follows the same premise, being that it is a place for people to get meals that are cooked and served to them to take out of the restaurant to eat. A mobile food facility is defined as any vehicle used in conjunction with a commissary or other permit food facility upon which food is sold or distributed at retail. This includes full-service catering trucks, taco trucks, hot dog carts, ice cream trucks, and coffee carts. As already stated, a mobile food facility must be affiliated with a commissary or a restaurant. The only federal license that is usually required for the restaurant is the alcohol dealer license for those who sell liquor on premises for consumption on premises. Of course, the restaurant will also need a license from the state, county, and or local government for the sale of alcohol or liquor. Again, this depends on the laws of that state and the location, as it is with the grocery stores. A food service establishment or food retail license will be required at the state or county level again. Again, a food plan review is required prior to obtaining and filing the food establishment license. These are obtained through the Health Department Environmental Health Division of the state or county, as I stated before. At the local level, there may be a general business license requirement as well as permits such as alarm, sign, and elevator permits. Some location-specific permits include FOG or Fats, Oils, and Grease permit, which are necessary for restaurants to manage and dispose of fog waste properly, preventing sewer blockages. Sidewalk cafe permits, dumpster permits, and fire department permits. These can be obtained either at the local level or your county level in most instances. Some of the legal hurdles to be aware of include health inspections again, which are done by the state or county health department. Most states require food handler or server certifications, which, again, there are classes for individuals that can be taken. They can either be taken online or in person. There are also specific safety and hygiene standards that are required for restaurants and mobile food facilities. There are not quite as many licenses and permits required for a restaurant or mobile food business as for a grocery store, but the potential of having over 5 or more licenses and permits is possible. Again, fees can be between $15 and over $1,000 if you're selling liquor. Turnaround times can vary from a few days to a few months in some cases. Generally, all of these licenses and permits require annual renewals and updates that are required to be done within 10 to 30 days. Of course, the renewals, again, can be at different times of the year, which can cause confusion. So, again, best to have an app, somebody who's really good at keeping track of things or partnering with a service to help you keep track of your renewals. I'm going to hand it over to Hans now.
Yeah, thanks, Kobe. So let's shift gears here, and we are going to talk a little bit about cottage food. Now, cottage food is homemade food. It's sold directly to consumers, right? So it might be someone down the street who bakes and sells pies at the farmer's market, or someone who cans berry preserves and sells them to locals, things like that. They're small. They're usually residential operations run right out of somebody's kitchen. Now, the cottage food regulatory landscape, it's the most mixed of bags, with some states like Arkansas, North Carolina, and Texas requiring no license or permit, basically, and other states like Virginia, Washington, and Arizona requiring very specific licenses at the state level, and still others like California, Indiana is one, Nevada, requiring licenses from county health departments, depending on which county the cottage food operation is in. Now, just because no license or permit is required in some of those states, it doesn't mean that there aren't still rules that cottage food producers must abide by. Most of those rules limit the types of food that can be legally sold as cottage food. By the way, as someone who hasn't been in the food industry, when I first heard cottage food, I assumed it meant cottage cheese. That's not what it means. It is local food made by just like a local person. Just getting that out of the way there. Again, most of the rules that the states do have limit the types of food that you can sell as cottage food. But basically, most states that do have these lists it includes things like pickled fruits and vegetables, spices, teas, nuts, seeds, honey, jams. I'm reading right now from the Colorado list. Jellies, preserves, fruit butter, flour, baked goods, candies, empanadas, tortillas, and foods that are basically considered non-potentially hazardous foods. It will also allow the sale of whole eggs, but it usually limits the amount that can be sold per month. And Colorado limits their amount at 250 per month. Now, a lot of cottage food laws will cap the revenue that a cottage food producer is allowed to make annually before being considered a manufacturer or something else. So some laws might some laws might also require the producer to take a food handling course, and others may prohibit things like interstate sales or reselling items brought from other producers. For those states and counties that do require cottage food licenses specifically, the application process usually isn't too complicated. You may need to provide a floor plan layout of your kitchen, which is funny in my opinion. I have a very small kitchen. It would be a very funny floor plan. You might be asked to provide information on water sources, whether you're using the well or the city water, things like that. You may need to show evidence that you've taken a food handler course, declare the type of food you'll be producing, and pay an annual fee, usually anywhere from $20 to $300, something like that. Now, we've noted on this slide that this area of the food industry has seen some legislative trends recently. And most notably, there's really been a relaxation in many states of laws, which has made things easier and more profitable for cottage food suppliers. And I'm not going to spend too much time. This is kind of a niche industry. So I'm going to go right into our next slide, which is, what's on the horizon. So what is on the horizon for food industry regulation? Well, we've seen some trends in a few areas post-pandemic, which I think we can finally say we're in the post-pandemic era now, right? I hope everybody agrees. So just to stick with the topic of cottage food for a minute, there's some evidence that in many states regulation is relaxing, like I said, which in itself is kind of an anomaly, right? Usually regulations, like we tend to swing back and forth, but inevitably we kind of lurch toward more regulation. But with cottage food, that seems to be the way that it's going, at least in some places it's getting more relaxed. Specifically, Indiana, for instance, a 2023 update to the cottage food laws expanded the range of non-potentially hazardous food items that can be produced at home. So it essentially expanded the scope of what can be sold under cottage food law. The new law, it also broadened the selling channels. So it allowed home-based producers to sell directly from home at roadside stands or even online alongside the traditional farmers markets. In Tennessee, there were some amendments in 2023 that increased the maximum allowable gross sales from $5,000 to $25,000. So, if you're a small cottage food operation prior to 2023, if you went beyond $5,000 in gross sales, you might end up having to pay for a more regulated license type. And it was often untenable for a lot of businesses. But with this new regulation, the cap is set at $25,000. So you can imagine the kind of effect that has on a small, maybe supplemental type business, right? The amendments also expanded the list of permissible products, same as in Indiana, and allowed for interstate sales with a few guardrails. But on the other hand, it also introduced a new requirement for food safety training, so not all deregulation there. And then several states have legislation proposed for this year concerning cottage food specifically. I'm staying on that topic. Arizona, Hawaii, and Massachusetts are proposing a bill which would similarly expand the list of foods that cottage businesses can deal with. Mississippi and Washington are increasing their gross sales cap for cottage food businesses, kind of like Tennessee did last year. And a couple of states, including Illinois, are clarifying their laws to make running a cottage food business easier. So they're adding clarifications to make it legal to sell cottage food at mobile farmers markets, for instance. They're setting up a structure to allow online sales, that kind of thing. Kobe, you had some things to add, I think, that are on the horizon in another sector, right?
Yes. Thanks. So the first one is the U.S. Farm Bill. In 2023, the USA extended the expiry date of its Agriculture Improvements Act of 2018, also referred to as the Farm Bill, from September 2023 to September 2024. However, many experts anticipate changes to that bill when it is renewed later this year. According to Shipman and Goodwin LLP, updates to the Farm Bill in 2024 could include increased regulation of CBD as a food additive and dietary supplement, expanded rural internet access to support farmers and producers investing in agriculture technologies, new policies and initiatives surrounding regenerative agriculture, holistic farming, and ranching practices. Now, why would I bring that up? Because some of these farms actually are some of our processors, food processors, and they may need to have that information. And the next act is associated with Hans's earlier factoid about use-by dates. The USA Food Date Labeling Act and No Toxics in Food Packaging Act is through the FDA, and it's edging closer to finalizing two significant reforms to U.S. food and drink packages in 2024. The Food Date Labeling Act is a bill proposing product expiration dates are qualified with either the phrase best if used by or used by. Authorities believe this will help American consumers differentiate between food that is no longer safe to eat past the listed date and foods which are still safe to consume, albeit past its best quality. Meanwhile, the No Toxics in Food Package Act will be prohibiting the use of 5 classes of chemicals and packaging that comes into contact with the food. I'm not even going to try to pronounce these, but there's 5 chemicals that they're trying to ban. While neither bill has been finalized, both acts could come into force between the end of this year. If that's all of the what's coming up in the horizons, we can move on to questions.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So, I see a question here. If manufacturers rent out their rent its facility, does the property owner have to maintain the facility license registration, or does the manufacturer itself maintain these license or registrations? And I can answer that pretty quickly. It's the manufacturer who needs to hold that license or registration. It's not the business. It's not the building owner. You may need documentation from the building owner that you are allowed to run that business in that location, but the manufacturer would be required to get that license. Another question that we have here, what is the impact of using cannabis and or marijuana in foods and beverages in states where these substances are legal? First, I want everyone to still be aware that federal law, these items are still considered illegal. So now having said that, 23 states have made edibles fully legal while 6 states are still fully illegal. 22 states have a mix of legal status, so it is best to look at the state and local laws around this type of food ingredient. And just because a state may say that it's legal, a county or city may still say it is illegal. When people talk about edibles, they're usually referring to the ability to consume marijuana by mouth. During the past few years, culture perceptions have changed significantly. Now, many states across the country allow someone to can give marijuana edible a try. Each election has at least one state that asks voters to decide if recreational marijuana use should be illegal or legal in their state. After 2022 midterm elections, 21 states and the District of Columbia have voted to make recreational marijuana legal. It is important to note that marijuana legislation is changing quickly. Those are the 2 questions that I can answer right now. Hans, do you have some questions you can answer?
Yeah, I'll take a few. So I saw one. We run a food distributing center. Can you tell me what federal requirements we need to comply with? Yeah, sure. And that's a good question because I didn't really get a big chance to go over distributors specifically. But these are found, again, in that very first category we discussed, the manufacturers, processors, distributors, warehousers category. And so the big regulation at the federal level is going to be that food facility registration with the FDA. Now, for distributors specifically, there are some other federal hurdles you might need to jump through. So if you have a fleet of shipping trucks, for instance, those might need to be inspected, and you might need to comply with certain regulations like whether those trucks have suitable mechanisms for cold storage, things like that. And as a business that distributes from state to state, you'll probably need to get a US DOT number as a shipper using commercial vehicles. That'll come from the US Department of Transportation, hence US DOT number. And so you'll have to obtain that number and also get special tags for each truck, things like that. So good question there. How do we determine what licenses are needed? Yeah, so how do you as a business determine what licenses are needed? Well, you can certainly do your own research. Most information can be found online these days. And the federal government and the states, they're pretty good about providing clear instructions for filing and obtaining the licenses you need. But it can get tricky if you're trying to decide what license you need or what risk category of food you're dealing with. So employing a legal expert can be a good idea. Not employing, but what do they call it? Hiring or having them on retainer. I don't know if that makes sense. Or partnering with a compliance team like Walter School or CT, which has all of the knowledge and the know-how you need at our fingertips, right? I know because I run the knowledge base. So that's another option for you. Yeah, I think that answers the question. Do you have recommendations on how to manage all the different types of licenses needed as well as their renewal requirements? Yeah, so if you've ever attended one of my previous webinars, you'll know that I sometimes get on a soapbox and preach the importance of having a centralized, organized system for keeping track of the licenses that you have, so where you have them, when they renew, when they've been inspected, all that important information. And we get businesses coming to us all the time saying, we sort of have this Excel spreadsheet with some of our information and the rest is in Stacy's email. And then there's some dates in our Google Docs and they hire us to sort it all out. But that's my biggest recommendation, plan for scaling your business. Assume that you'll have to manage 100 different licenses someday and build a system that helps you stay compliant. At Walter School or CT, we have one that our clients use called Click, which is just that. It's like a portal where all your licenses are stored. You can see which ones are coming up for renewal, access documents, order us to file the renewals or new licenses for you, all of that. But have a system, use new technology. It's out there. So I'll step down from my soapbox. I think that's it. We will I see some other questions. I'm going to try to get back. Kobe and I will respond to the ones that we didn't get to via email in the coming days. I appreciate the questions. I also appreciate everyone for attending these webinars. And I look forward to any sort of feedback you all have. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Aisha at this point, unless Kobe, you have anything else you want to say?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. Have a great day, everybody. Stay on the line, please, for Aisha.
Thank you, Hans and Kobe. Before we conclude today's webinar, I would like to go over a few evaluation questions. The first question is, would you like to be contacted by one of CT's business license experts? Again, that is, would you like to be contacted by one of CT's business license experts? I'll give everyone a few more seconds before moving on. Okay, our next question is, please rate the value of today's webinar content on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Again, that is, please rate the value of today's webinar content on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. And moving on to our final evaluation question. Please rate the value of today's presenters on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Again, that is, please rate the value of today's presenters on a scale from 1 to 5, where 5 is the highest and 1 is the lowest. Thank you for joining. This concludes today's live webinar. You may now disconnect.